Show, don't tell. How many times have you heard this advice? Because while this advice certainly got a few more brain cells firing when I first heard it, it wasn't until years later that I realized how much this rule constrains your writing if you never break it, just like any other rule. So, in this video, part 1 of 2, I want to give this advice some much needed context and impress upon you what it means, when to heed it, and when not to. Then, in part 2, as always, I'll impart some pen to paper techniques, ones you can apply directly to your own writing. In other words, in this video, I'm going to tell you what's what, and in the next, I'm going to show you how it's done. So, allow me to tell you a thing or two about telling, and why many writers consider it forbidden and insist that instead, you show. Telling is, more or less, as it sounds. You're simply stating a piece of information, often in a very matter-of-fact way, and will almost always use the passive voice to do so. Check out my earlier video on the active voice for more on that. Links in the description. You can tell emotion, as in, the man was angry. You can tell the reader what a person, place, or thing looks like, as in, the sky was gray and dreary, or the woman's dress was green silk. You can tell external information, or commonly known information, as in, Bob was a carpenter, Tim, he was a drunk. And you can tell internal information, that is, insight into a character's mind, as in, Bob hated Tim. For newer writers, telling often takes the form of info dumping, which is when you cram too much exposition into one scene. There's nothing inherently wrong with exposition, just be sure you use it to give answers to questions the reader is asking and not ones you haven't even posed. And just be careful you don't overdo it. Generally speaking, telling is a dry way of conveying information and doesn't paint much of a picture, which is why it's considered less impactful, engaging, and immersive than showing. Which begs the question, what is showing? I like to explain it as writing in such a way that what you're describing is one layer of abstraction from the truth you would otherwise tell. The truth may be that the man was angry, but it's more engaging to show this by writing, "The man slammed his fist upon the table," and leave the reader to the joyous task of bridging that gap all on their own. Showing is like the sensory equivalent of implying, and it's often done by describing the consequences of a thing being how it is, or doing how it do. In the prior example, angry is what the man is, but the consequence of him being angry is that he slams his fist on the table, this action being a thing that an angry man might do. And you don't just show through actions, but also through descriptions and even dialogue, because the way a character describes something offers insight into the way they see the world, or, in other words, you can show by putting what is through the filter of a character's unique perspective. You can describe the setting in a way that shows, or implies, that the character perceiving it is happy, as in, the deer frolicked in a field, tall grass and dandelions, daisies too. All the while squirrels chattered and played among the branches of the pines. Or, you can describe the same setting in a way that shows the character is bitter, as in, the deer grazed, heads low, one always watching. All the while, those filthy, furry-tailed little rodents ruined evening's peace with their chatter, fighting among the branches of the pines. As a writer, showing must become a mindset whereby you're training your brain to see your story not through the lens of the omniscient knower of things you are, but through the perspective of each character. In other words, you're training yourself to see your story not for what it is, but as a series of actions, perspectives, and dialogues that are the way they are because of what is. Now, I won't lie, this takes a lot of practice, and may involve countless hours just staring at this damn cactus. But it's necessary. Showing is an extremely important tool that every writer needs to both possess and sharpen. Essentially, it's what lends depth to your writing and what makes it impactful, engaging, and immersive when it needs to be. It also allows the writer to accomplish multiple things at the same time, which is one of the hallmarks of high-quality writing. When you show a man slamming his fist on the table, you are not only showing that he is angry, but also a progression in the plot, as well as some description of the setting, the table. All these things combined, and likely more, is what gave rise to the old adage, show, don't tell. And this is good advice, generally speaking, because if you're new to narrative writing, it's crucial that you both learn and hone this skill. But a problem arises when this advice is regarded as law written in stone that must never be broken. Ever. And this is a misunderstanding. No writing rule should ever be adhered to 100% of the time. A more complete, though certainly less catchy, piece of advice would, to my mind, be: show information that is dynamic, important, and best left open to interpretation. Tell information that is static, unimportant, and best stated clearly. And if you tell something important, be sure to expand that statement by showing. Let's unpack that. Dynamic information refers to things that are subject to change, most notably dramatic changes in a character's physical, emotional, mental, or even spiritual state of being, while static information refers to things that are unchanging, such as a character's job or eye color. You want to show dynamic information through a character's actions, perspectives, and dialogue, because a story is all about what changes, not what remains the same. On the other hand, you often want to tell static information, because showing someone's occupation might require an entire scene, and maybe they're not nearly important enough to warrant that. And if you try and show a basic physical trait, like hair or eye color, you run the risk of making your prose overly flowery, or purple, as such prose are often called. It often serves your story well to describe a person, place, or thing in as few words as possible, and move on. Next, we have important information, and this is anything you want your reader to really invest their attention in, which is largely determined by how crucial a given moment is to the plot or a character's journey. Unimportant information, on the other hand, is, for example, the 15 uneventful minutes a character spent rowing from ship to shore, or the small fluctuations in a character's state of being, like feeling a bit tired one morning. You want to show important information because showing engages the reader on a deeper level, and naturally, you want them to invest their attention in what's important. A reader's attention span, however, is limited. No matter how engaging the writing is, they will lose focus eventually. And this is why one of the main functions of telling is to give the reader a breather and allow their attention span to renew itself before they dive back into narratively or emotionally deep waters. This contrast also makes it more impactful when you get back to the showing, and can be used to adjust the pace. Tell to speed it up, and show to slow it down. The third guideline, namely how open to interpretation you want your writing to be, is important to mention because, as I touched on earlier, while you do want the bulk of your story to be separated from the told truth by one layer of abstraction, thus allowing the reader to make that leap themselves, it's sometimes necessary to just make things clear. This is particularly the case with character motivations. If you never explicitly tell the reader your character's motivations, you'll find many readers will be confused as to what exactly they are. And this ties nicely into the final guideline. If you tell something important, be sure to expand that statement by showing. Because you can't just tell the reader what your character's motivations are, you also have to show this to be true through their actions, perspectives, and dialogue. This mix of showing and telling also applies to descriptions of people, places, and things, as well as introspection, but more on that in part 2. Now, since most of your novel should be packed full of emotions, actions, and dialogue that are dynamic, important, and open to interpretation, showing will, and should, make up the bulk of it. But suppressing every urge to tell the reader something may lead you to write a story that is unbearably dense, slow-paced, overly flowery, and quite possibly misunderstood in fundamental ways. But I shall tell you no more. Tune in next week so I can show you how it's done.